I want to read you a story called The Last One on the Bus, The Importance of Inclusion. It's actually designed for a primary school assembly, but I thought it might be worth us thinking about it too. I haven't used this one in an assembly yet, but I think that I will before too long. Here's the story. What a fantastic trip they'd all had. Nobody could remember going on an educational visit quite like it. Hypothesis, it was called. An adventure in science and technology, according to the glossy brochures. There'd been buttons to push, levers to pull, water guns to aim, and interactive computer simulations. Everybody's favourite had been the mechanical digger. They'd queued for ages, but eventually Mrs. Lenton had managed to organise all the children into having a go. Well, almost all the children. Liam didn't want to turn, in spite of everyone telling him how great it was. It's just like being in a real digger, sighed Sam with feeling. His dad worked for a builder, so he should know. Who cares? Sneered Liam, hands thrust deep into his pockets, a scowl decorating his otherwise uninteresting face. It looks boring to me, just like the rest of this stupid place. But Liam, you're the only one out of the whole 3 classes who hasn't tried it, wheedled Mrs. Lenton, placing an encouraging arm around his skinny shoulders. Come now, you'll enjoy it, I'm sure, she added without much conviction. Liam shrugged her arm away irritably and stomped off towards the mining exhibition, muttering inaudibly to himself. He shouldered a couple of girls out of his path. Nobody was sorry to see him go. After lunch in a bustling, noisy dining room, shared with what seemed like at least 8 other school parties, it was time to visit the shop. Everyone had been told to bring just £2, but even this small amount of money was difficult to spend. It was so hard to decide. Should I buy a rubber, pencil and sharpener set, or a woolly bear with a bright red t-shirt carrying the words Hypothesis, Science and Technology Park? Or perhaps they should get that keyring torch. But then again, how could you not buy a plastic viewer that gave you a fly's eye view of the world? 3 classes took their turn to meander between the shelves, picking up item after item, only to put them back disappointedly as they realised they were not quite right. Just get a move on, please, everyone, begged Mrs. Lenton. The buses will be here soon, and we've got a long journey on the motorway ahead of us. Before I carry on, I'm going to put the light on. It's gone very dark in here suddenly. There, that's better. Eventually, the last of the children dragged herself away from the till, still uncertain about her purchases, but resigned to the fact that Mrs. Lenton wasn't prepared to wait any longer for her to make up her mind. As they hurried towards the first of the 2 gleaming 53-seater coaches, Mrs. Lenton noticed a huddle of teachers and assistants in agitated conversation. Arms were being waved, eyes were darting from face to face, and I knew something like this would happen. Looks were being exchanged. What's the problem? She inquired as she drew near enough to make herself heard over the babble of voices. It's Liam. He's not here, answered Mr. Richards, whose class Liam was in. He was in Jessica's dad's group at lunchtime, but he went to the toilet, then disappeared. I'm really sorry, he continued, but I suppose I'm not too surprised. Don't worry, said Mrs. Lenton encouragingly. If anyone's responsible, it's me. After all, I am the trip leader. I'll just ask the kids if they've had any idea where he is. While Mrs. Lenton clambered wearily up the steps of the first coach, Mr. Richards hurried back to the second. Having quietened the chattering children, some of whom were having a sneaky suck at their drink bottles, both of them asked the inevitable question, has anyone seen Liam? On both buses, the two teachers were met with stony gazes, shaking heads, and quizzical expressions. Why don't we just leave without him, miss? Suggested one boy from the back of Mrs. Lenton's bus. His idea was greeted with a chorus of laughter from his friends. But they soon went quiet when they saw the look on her face. She hurried back down the bus steps, checked with Mr. Richards that his quest had been equally fruitless, and then marched determinedly back into Hypothesis. Mrs. Lenton checked the shop, the water zone, the space zone, the adventure playground, the ball pool, the dining room, the toilets, and the central arena. Nothing. Not a sign. It was then that a thought struck her. It was a wild idea, but it was her last chance before she notified the centre staff, the police, and goodness only knows who else. There was just a chance. She hadn't tried the Earth Zone yet. Mrs. Lenton knew where to look. She marched straight past the groups of children from other schools, playing on the different activities or filling in their worksheets. And there he was, his back to her, totally absorbed with the controls in his deft, flickering fingers. His gaze focused on the mechanical arm beyond the glass. Liam had mastered the digger. Everyone was surprised by the look on Mrs. Lenton's face when she returned to the coach with Liam beside her. They were equally surprised by the 2 large tubs of sweets that she'd bought in the shop on her way out, one for each coach. To celebrate, as she'd simply put it. But no one was as surprised as Liam, who, on climbing the steps onto his bus, was greeted by the applause of 49 children and 3 adults who, for the first time in as long as he could remember, were genuinely pleased to see him. Why did I think that might be suitable for us? Well, I wonder who you identified with in that story. Did you identify with Liam, feeling like the odd one out? Maybe saying he didn't want to have a go on the diggers because he was afraid in case he couldn't manage it and people laughed. I don't know. What was he thinking? Why was he in such a foul mood? Did he think that nobody liked him? Is that why he was so, I don't like anything? Did you identify with Liam? Is there something of Liam in you or me? Or did you identify with the children, some of whom seemed to think it didn't matter about him? Oh, he's a nuisance. We're better off without him. Have we ever felt like that about somebody? Not a nice thing to admit, but I'm sure that we all have at one time or another. Or did you identify with Mrs. Lenton, thinking that It was her responsibility, going looking for him, searching. Did you identify with the child's father who had been in charge of that particular group? Mr. Richards, Liam's teacher. Who did you identify with and why? The story is obviously about the lost sheep, the one who went astray. And Mrs. Lenton, of course, is like Jesus, the Good Shepherd, going to find the lost sheep, regardless of what some of his classmates thought of him. And to be fair, how difficult he must have seemed to her. And I wonder how difficult we seem to God sometimes. But he still searches for us and brings us back into the fold. I wonder how Liam felt when he got onto the coach and all his classmates cheered and clapped. Maybe he wasn't so universally disliked as he perhaps thought. How often have we felt sorry for ourselves and maybe blown things out of proportion? But as we are an inclusive church, my challenge to you is to think and pray and ask God to show you whether you have got fed up with somebody and felt you're better off without them because maybe they're not as easy to get along with for whatever reason. And maybe if you have, maybe you could ask the Lord to show you how that person is feeling and what you might do to improve the situation for both of you. And I challenge you also to speak to God about the times maybe when you or I have felt like the one that's pushed out and maybe have been a little bit grumpy and not wanted to join in, or said we've not wanted to join in. Just take these things, whatever has come to you through this story, take them to the Lord in prayer, as the song says, as the hymn says. Ask him to help you with whatever has been raised for you in this story. Amen.